Hey guys, it's Zach with Zaks Muscle Motors again. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Tech Talk. Today we're back with our 327 small block. I'm going to show you how to install your main bearings and your crank. We're going to get started with how to install your bearings into the block. It's pretty basic. And then we're going to show you how to use a plastic gauge to check your clearance between your bearings and your crankshaft and torque down your mains. So let's get the camera set up and I'll show you guys how to go through that process. Let's get busy. Alright, so let's get started on our crankshaft install. Before we get started with the actual installation part, I want to go over bearings with you just a little bit. And I'm sorry for the shaky camera. I'm having to hold it by hand right now, but that's okay. Your small block Chevy, in the rear of your block, in the rear main, you have your thrust bearing. That helps keep the crankshaft in play, in check. Then you have 4 other main bearings. In this block, you have a 2-piece rear main seal, which instead of having just one big round seal that goes into a housing that bolts to the back of the block, this is 2 individual halves that sit down into the block, and I'll show you in just a moment how I'm going to orient those inside the block. Next, after you install your bearings, make sure they're clean on the front and back. Get all the oil and stuff from the packaging off of the bearings. Wipe them down with a microfiber cloth or spray them with some brake cleaner. Blow them off the air hose. Check them. Make sure there's no scoring or marks or nits or dings or anything like that. You want them to be in good shape when you put them in. Put them in dry. Got a bearing right here. On your bearing, you've got this little keyway right here, down by my thumb. Okay, it fits the notch in this block. So you take it and you just slide it down in here. Takes a little bit of playing sometimes. Now, I'm not touching the surface of the bearing. What you want to do, get that keyway down there. It'll line up flush on both sides. Just kind of fill it with your finger. Get it absolutely as close as you can. Now you notice I'm not touching the surface of the bearing, actually the face of the bearing, with my finger. Okay. Now once you got this as flush as you can get it, it should be so close you almost shouldn't be able to feel anything next to it at all. We're going to go ahead and put the crank in and all that stuff. When you do this, after you have your bearings installed, make sure they're completely dry on the front. You don't want any oil on there. You don't want any oil on the main journals that sit into these saddles. You want to do a plastic gauge check. Now, what a plastic gauge check is going to do is you take it's a little, really small piece of wax. Just a little stick of wax, and you set it inside each of your main bearings. You set the crank in on top of it dry. No oil on it whatsoever. Do not spin the crank. After you set the crank in, put your main caps on, torque your main caps down to specs. Once it's torqued down to spec, pull them back off, and then you're going to check your plastic gauge. I've already done that on this motor. I don't have a video on it. I will do that in a separate video on another motor for you guys so I can show you that process. After you've verified that you have the correct crankshaft or the clearance tolerances, then you can clean your plastic gauge back off. It's wax, it just wipes off. Use a microfiber cloth, clean it off, spray it with some brake cleaner, clean it off, make sure it's clean. And then we'll go to the next step, which is actually installing the cam. That's what I'm going to, the crankshaft, and that's what I'm going to show you here in just a second. Before we get to that, back here on your main seal, I've already had the crank in and out of this a couple times, just checking everything. So there is some oil on here, which is no big deal because I'm ready to put it in anyway. I'm going to get the oil on it. Back here though, in this main seal, what some people do, and I've made the mistake too before, is taking this rear main seal and making it flush with the back of the block here, just like you do with your mains, the bearings. You don't want to have it flush like this, and the reason for that is with this separation right here, it does give it a leak path to seep oil. So you want to twist it down inside, and when you put your main cap on, the other bearing will slide down and meet this part, and this will slide up into the main cap and meet that part of the bearing, and it hides the seal inside the metal. You put just a little bit of like RTV gasket maker here, or gasket sealer, and that will help seal up this seal and it won't leak. So there's just a little tip for you. So let's we'll get the camera set up and I'll show you guys the crank install and the torque down process and all that. Alright, so like I said, I want to put a little bit of RTV right here on the seal, just on the outside of this lip, because I want to make sure that I have a tight seal on the rear main seal, because I don't want oil to leak down in the transmission inspection cover and all that. So I'm just going to add a little bit to the back side of the seal here, and a little bit to the outside of the seal, or the block there, for the seal on the other main cap. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put oil on the bearings. I'll put my glove on. You want to have a good coat of oil. Now, if your engine's going to sit a little while, you're going to want to use some type of a thicker engine assembly lube. This motor's not going to sit very long before it gets fired, so I'm just going to use oil here. This is just 10W30 oil, no big deal. Now that you've got your mains coated in oil, the next thing you want to do is take your crank, or set the crank in. Going straight and easy. Trying to work my way around the seal down here, which sometimes can be a pain in the butt, but I'll make it work. There we go. Now, the next thing you're going to do is get your oil back out. Turns good. I'm going to put just a little bit of oil on the top of the mains. I don't want to put too much right now because I don't want to get that much oil on the mating surface where the main cap goes onto the block. I don't want to do that. And I'll put just a little bit of oil back here too, around where the rear main seal goes, just to give it a little coating so it's not rubbing against the crankshaft dry. Now I'm going to set my main caps in order where I've already got the bearing installed. I hope you can see that. Just going to set them on. Again, make sure you put them in the right order, in the right direction, because it does matter. See, when these are cut, they're cut a certain way, and if you get it out of whack, then if you get them spun backwards, that cut's not going to line up right, and you can cause yourself a lot of trouble. You can snag a bearing real quick, spin a bearing inside the bore, and then it's time to go in and have it bored and hung and all that fun stuff. So, next thing I want to do, dip in oil, get just a little bit of oil on top of the main. And the reason we do this, the reason you put the oil on the threads, and when you put the oil up here on top of the main cap, is each fastener has a torque threshold, and what you're doing by putting the oil or the manufacturer suggested lubricant on the threads and the bolt head is when you torque the bolt down, you're basically using friction to get your torque. So what's happening if you use if you put your main caps in, or any of your fasteners like this, and you don't put the lubricant that the manufacturer suggests on the bolt threads and on the bolt head, when you torque that particular fastener down, what's going to happen is it's going to have a higher friction. and that friction will give you a false reading on your torque. So if you put them in dry with nothing on them, you might get 65, 70 foot-pounds out of a fastener. However, you don't actually have that torque on the threads. You're not putting that much of a squeeze on your part that you're torquing down. So that's why it's crucial to use the manufacturer's suggested lubricant to do your torque, because it reduces that friction and it gets you an accurate torque reading. So that's why this is so important. And you want to make sure you get it underneath the bolt head on the top of the main cap, because when you torque it down, you twist it, it's also putting friction, centrifugal friction, I guess you could call it, against the main cap. So you want to have that friction lessened as much as you can too. So, pull my glove off, I'm done with it. Next thing I want to do is just run these down. Let me grab an extender, just to make it a little easier here. Okay, now you don't want to like wrench these things down, you just want to hand snug it. And before you do any real tightening on it, you want to make sure that your main is sitting flat with the block, that it's not lifted up or raised up on one side. You want to make sure that the mating surfaces are completely fat and meshed well, or flat and meshed well together, not fat, but flat. And you're just running it down until it stops. If you watch, if you can see my hand, I hope you can. You're just going to run the wrench around just to where it stops on your finger, and you don't want to tighten it down beyond that. Not yet. Okay, now that I've got that part done, the next thing I like to do is take my brass hammer, that's going to help ensure that the main is flush with the block. And I'll give it one more little look around. Put my crankshaft socket on. Now what I'm doing is just checking to make sure that the machine surfaces on the main caps are sitting flat with the block, that it's not sitting off at an angle or anything. We don't want to torque it down cockeye, because you can warp a main cap and then you're going to have issues with that bearing, so you really not want to do that. Now, the torque specs for these, and always check with your manufacturer, is 70 foot-pounds. I like to do these in 3-step increments, and I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a second. When you're working with fasteners like this, whatever you do to this side is going to affect this side. So if you torque this side down, this side might loosen up, it might tighten up. So what you need to do is torque one side, go to the other, and then I go around to each one, do one torque setting. I'll bump it up to the next torque amount. So right now I'm at 20 foot-pounds. Put my wrench on. It comes right there and stops. Really pay attention with 20 foot-pounds depending on your torque wrench, because some of them don't crack that loud, and you don't want to over torque it. Alright, now, once you got your first torque sequence like that done, give your crank a spin. It spins nice and easy. It doesn't take next to no effort at all to do it, and that's great. Sometimes you can get a bind at 20 foot-pounds. Sometimes it takes a little bit more, but that's what you want to keep an eye on, is every time you do a little torque sequence, make sure you give it a spin, because I've seen it before where there'd be a small deflection, and once we got to 40 foot-pounds, it would tighten up, but we couldn't turn it. But we'd back it off to like 35, it would spin. So we had to go in and find out exactly what was wrong with it. Ended up it needed a whole new line bore on the mains. So we had to get that done. So now I'm going to go to 40 foot-pounds. Actually, I'll tell you, we'll go to 45. 45 foot-pounds. All right, 40 foot-pounds on all of them. Still turns real nice and easy. So it's safe to say we get to 70 foot-pounds, we're going to be completely fine. So now I'm going to take my torque wrench, go to 70 foot-pounds. All right, we're on 70. Now, one more thing I'm going to do before we get there. Hit with just a little bit of brake cleaner, because I'm going to take a marker and I'm going to make a mark on these bolt heads when I do the torque. Just to verify that I have in fact torqued it. And my paint marker ran out the other day, so I'm going to use this yellow Sharpie, which works. It's not the most effective, but it does the job. So here we go. $70, $70. I gotta have it going to that side, I don't know why. This isn't something you have to do, but it just helps you verify. I'm going to go back again. I'll mark the opposite way. This just double checks the torque. You don't want to go past your torque mark on your second torque. You just want to go to where it breaks, and that's it. All right. Now we give our crank and nerve spin. There it is. Look how easy that is. No effort. Spins really well. Look at that. There you go. That's your crank install. Now, after it's installed, you want to go back and check in play. And basically you're going to run one into your, take a hammer, your mallet, your brass hammer, whatever. Tap into the crank, get it all the way back, and you're going to take a magnetic gauge, mount it to the front of your block, and put you a dial indicator. Just run it down, zero it on the front of your crank snout right here, and you're gonna run the crank back the other way and see how many thousandths of an inch of play you have. And I'll do that in a separate video too. So that's pretty much it. This part of it's done outside of just checking the crankshaft in play. Alright, well there you have it. We just went through the entire crank install process. At this time you should have a really good understanding of what you're looking for, how to check your clearances on your bearings to your crank journal, and how to torque it down, install your rear main seal, all that. So from this point we're going to go and install the camshaft, and then we're going to put the rotating assembly in. So it's moving right along. We're doing pretty well. I should have this done by the end of the week if all continues to go well. So stay tuned for the next video. Remember, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. Go to my Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. And you can call me, text me, email, message me, whatever. I'm cool with that. So get a hold of me, and see you on the next video.